The Darién Gap was known as the Jungle of Death, a place where the land itself seemed to come alive, twisting and shifting to trap those foolish enough to enter. Noel and Louis thought they were prepared for the dangers of the wild, until the jungle began to move. Paths that had once seemed clear now disappeared into nothingness, and landmarks they recognized vanished into the thick fog of the rainforest. As the days dragged on, they began to hear whispers in the air, soft, haunting voices carried by the wind. And then they saw it, a figure, tall and grotesque, gliding through the trees, watching them, waiting. With every step, the jungle seemed to draw them deeper into its grasp, and with every nightfall, the creature grew closer. Something was hunting them, and the jungle itself was determined to make sure they never left. Welcome to Sunday Scares, where the shadows whisper and nightmares come to life. But did you know that 96% of you watching aren't subscribed? If you love chilling tales that keep you up at night, hit like to feed the darkness, and subscribe if you dare. Now turn off the lights, settle in, and let the horror begin. Darién Gap swallowed them whole. Towering trees loomed overhead, their tangled branches blotting out the sun, casting the jungle floor in a dim, eternal twilight. Vines dripped from the canopy like nooses, and the air hung thick with humidity, clinging to the skin like a fevered breath. Somewhere in the distance, an unseen creature let out a low, guttural growl. Noel adjusted the straps of his backpack, sweat trickling down his spine. This place feels wrong. It's just a jungle, Daniel muttered, checking the GPS. The device flickered, struggling to get a signal. People have crossed before. We're just overthinking it. Louis, the most experienced of the three, stood a few paces ahead, machete in hand. He didn't speak. He simply stared down the path in front of them, jaw tight. "Louis?" Noel called. Louis didn't respond right away. His eyes were locked onto something in the dirt. A single fresh footprint. It was human, but none of them had walked ahead yet. A silence stretched between them, thick and unnatural. The jungle, once alive with the distant calls of birds and insects, had gone deathly still. Luis finally exhaled and shook his head. "Probably just another traveler," he muttered. "Let's move." But as they pressed forward, the feeling of being watched did not fade. By midday, they had covered less ground than expected. Every path looked the same, and their markers, pieces of bright orange cloth they tied to branches, had vanished. "We're going in circles," Noel said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I know we tied a marker back there. Now it's gone." Louis stopped, looking at the compass hanging from his belt. The needle spun erratically, refusing to settle. Daniel frowned at the GPS. "No satellite reception." "Great," Noel huffed. "So what now? We just keep walking and hope the jungle doesn't decide to eat us?" Louis turned to him, his expression unreadable. "The jungle doesn't decide anything." He wiped sweat from his brow and pointed ahead. "We keep going." But deep down, all three of them knew something wasn't right. As the sky darkened, they found a small clearing to set up camp. The jungle never truly grew quiet, but tonight, the sounds were different. The usual hum of insects had taken on an eerie rhythmic quality, like a whispering chant buried beneath the rustling leaves. The occasional snap of a branch echoed louder than it should have, and every so often there was a distant shuffle, something moving beyond the trees. Luis built a small fire, the flickering flames barely enough to push back the surrounding darkness. "We sleep in shifts," he said. "Noel, you first. Daniel, second. I'll take last." Noel nodded, though sleep felt impossible. He sat near the fire, listening to the jungle breathe. The trees swayed, whispering secrets to each other. He swore he could hear something out there just beyond his sight. Then he saw it, a footprint, in the dirt just beyond the firelight. It hadn't been there a moment ago. He froze, heart hammering. The print was fresh, too fresh. The edges were crisp, untouched by the elements. Noel! He nearly jumped out of his skin. Lewis was awake, watching him. Noel pointed at the footprint. That wasn't there before. Louis's face darkened. He rose slowly, gripping his machete. Wake Daniel. Noel did, shaking Daniel's shoulder. His friend grumbled, but sat up, rubbing his eyes. What? Louis was already stepping toward the footprint, his jaw clenched. He crouched, running his fingers through the dirt. Still warm, he murmured. What does that mean? Noel whispered. Louis stood up, scanning the trees. The fire crackled, casting long, writhing shadows across the jungle floor. It means, he said carefully, whoever left this print was standing here a few seconds ago. Daniel swore under his breath. We didn't hear anything. Noel swallowed hard. But we would have. No one can move that fast, that quietly. A breeze whispered through the trees, carrying a strange, almost human sigh. Noel turned sharply, eyes darting into the blackness beyond their firelight. That's when he saw them. More footprints. Not just one, several, leading away from their camp deeper into the jungle. And then, a voice. It was distant, barely audible, but unmistakable. A single word. Come. The whisper slithered through the trees like a living thing, curling around them. Daniel scrambled to his feet. Did you hear that? Noel could barely breathe. Someone's out there. Louis stared into the dark, face pale. No, he whispered. Something's out there. The jungle shifted around them. The trees swayed, though there was no wind. The shadows stretched longer, creeping toward their feet. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the voice was gone. The jungle returned to its usual hum, as if nothing had happened. Daniel took a slow step back. We leave at first light. Noel nodded. Louis, however, kept staring at the footprints, because now, among them, was one that looked exactly like his own. The jungle was different when daylight returned. The air felt thicker, pressing down on them like a living thing. The trees, which had once stood in familiar, recognizable clusters, now seemed taller, denser. Wrong. Noel's gut twisted as he scanned their surroundings. Something had shifted in the night. Daniel was already stuffing his gear into his pack, eyes darting to the phantom footprints that had appeared beyond their camp. We need to go. Now. Louis crouched by the footprints again, running a hand through the dirt. His jaw was tight. They weren't here when we set up camp, he murmured. And look. He pointed at the prints, then at the identical one nearby. This one looks exactly like mine. Noel felt his stomach drop. What the hell are you saying? Louis stood, gripping his machete. I'm saying something is messing with us. No one argued. They packed up in silence, and by the time the fire was nothing but smoldering embers, they were moving. They walked for hours, but something was wrong with the path. It wasn't just that everything looked the same. It felt new, as if no one had ever stepped there before. As if their footprints were the first to touch this part of the jungle. This isn't right, Noel muttered. Daniel checked the GPS for the 10th time. I don't get it. We should be moving east. Louis stopped suddenly. Look ahead, he said. They all followed his gaze. There, about 50 feet in front of them, a bright orange cloth dangled from a tree branch. Noel's breath hitched. That's our marker. Daniel shook his head. It can't be. We've been walking straight for hours. There's no way we looped back. But it was their marker, the same one they had tied to that tree yesterday. Lewis grabbed a nearby stick and tossed it ahead, letting it land near the cloth. "Let's test something." They watched, waited. Nothing happened. Lewis exhaled sharply. "Okay. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we did loop." The jungle blinked. Noel didn't know how else to describe it. For just a split second, everything in front of them flickered, as if the entire world had glitched. And when it returned to normal, the marker was gone. The stick Louis had thrown, gone too. What the actual hell? Daniel took a step back, his voice shaking. "You guys saw that, right?" Noel nodded, his throat dry. Lewis didn't respond right away. He turned his head slowly, scanning the trees. "We're leaving. Now, and we're not stopping until we hit open land." They moved faster after that. Too fast. Twigs snapped underfoot. The jungle was louder now, as if the trees were whispering. Every shadow felt closer than it should have been. And then, a scream, high-pitched, piercing, coming from behind them. Noel spun around, heart hammering. What the hell was that? Louis' expression darkened. It sounded like Daniel. They all turned at once. Daniel wasn't there. His backpack was on the ground, his flashlight still on, flickering weakly. Noel's stomach lurched. "Daniel?" Silence. Noel's breath came in short gasps. He was right behind us. Louis cursed under his breath, grabbing Daniel's pack. "Stay close. No one separates, no matter what." They moved slowly now, scanning every inch of the jungle, listening for any sound, but there was nothing. The jungle was silent again. And then, footprints, leading away from the path. Daniel's? Maybe. But mixed among them were others. Footprints that didn't belong to any of them. Noel felt ice creep down his spine. "Lewis," he whispered. Lewis followed his gaze. His face paled. The new footprints were deeper, heavier, as if something bigger had been walking alongside them, as if it had been there the entire time. A branch snapped in the distance. Then, a whisper. "Come." Noel clenched his fists. He knew that voice. It was the same one from last night. Louis pulled out his machete, his knuckles white. "Keep moving." They followed the path, but the jungle was different now. The trees seemed taller, the air thicker. Noel kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see Daniel stumbling toward them, dazed but alive. He never came. The footprints led them deeper. The jungle closed in, and Daniel's name was never spoken again. The jungle had grown unnaturally quiet, but it felt like the silence of waiting, as though something was poised, just out of sight, watching them. Louis led the way, machete slicing through the dense underbrush, but even his movements seemed stilted, as if he were trying to force through a membrane that resisted him. Noel felt the same, a pressure on his chest, as if the very air was pushing back, a weight that had only grown since Daniel's disappearance. They followed the footprints, but the deeper they went, the less sense the landscape made. The trees that had once been familiar were now alien, grotesque, their trunks twisted in ways that felt unnatural, limbs reaching out like fingers. The path had been clear at first, but now it split, forked into strange directions that felt wrong. "I can't keep doing this," Noel muttered. He was exhausted, his muscles aching, the weight of his pack like a stone on his back. His throat felt raw from swallowing his fear. Louis didn't respond, his jaw set. His eyes, however, were darting around with an intensity Noel had never seen before. He was searching, looking for something. After a moment, Louis stopped, pointing to a large rock formation that jutted out from the earth ahead. The strange symbols carved into the rock seemed to glow faintly, pulsing in the dim light. "What the hell?" Noel whispered. "That's new," Louis said, voice low. "I've been here before. This wasn't here. Noel stepped closer, inspecting the carvings. They were foreign, old, unnervingly old, like something that didn't belong in this world. The symbols were intricate and impossible to decipher. It was almost as if the rocks themselves were alive, shifting under his gaze. Then suddenly, a snap. Noel's head whipped around, but there was nothing. Just the trees, the shadows, the choking silence. "Did you hear that?" Noel asked. Louis nodded, eyes narrowing. "We need to move. Now." They turned back to the path, but it had changed. The rocks, the landmarks, were gone. There was no sign of the fork they had just passed. They had been walking in a straight line, but now the trees had closed in behind them, erasing their tracks, the jungle swallowing their steps like they'd never been there at all. "Noel," Louis said quietly, "this isn't happening." Noel's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Louis' voice lowered. "We're not alone." Noel froze. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a cold, prickling sensation spreading across his skin. Something was moving, following them, but not in the way an animal would track them. No, this presence was more calculating, deliberate. Suddenly, the jungle shifted again. The air turned dense, thick with heat and the smell of damp earth. Noel's vision blurred for a split second, the landscape flickering before his eyes, as if the world itself had been rewound and played again. The trees, the path, the ground, they changed. "What the hell is going on?" Noel whispered. His voice felt small, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere around them. Louis grabbed his arm, pulling him to the side. "Stay low. Stay quiet." Noel's heart pounded in his chest as he sank to the ground. Every instinct told him to run, to scream, but the quiet, that heavy, stifling silence, kept him still. And then the whispering began. It was so soft at first, like the wind, but as it grew louder, Noel could hear it. A voice. Faint, unintelligible, but it was unmistakable. It sounded like someone calling their name over and over again. "Noel! Noel! Noel!" It wasn't Louis. It wasn't Daniel. It was something else. He clutched his chest, feeling the blood drain from his face. The voice wasn't coming from behind them, or from the jungle around them. It was coming from inside his mind, like the jungle itself was speaking directly to him. "Louis!" Noel breathed. Louis's eyes were wide, his body rigid. He was listening, his breath shallow. "Don't answer it," Louis said, voice barely a whisper. "Whatever you do, don't respond." Noel nodded quickly, his throat dry. His mind was spinning. What was happening? The whispering grew louder, closer, as if the jungle was closing in around them. The trees seemed to bend toward them, their branches swaying despite the absence of wind. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a low vibration that pulsed through the earth. Louis moved first, grabbing Noel by the shoulder and pulling him to his feet. "We need to move. Now." They stumbled forward, their feet slipping in the thick undergrowth. But no matter how fast they walked, it felt like they weren't getting any closer to safety. The jungle kept shifting, the world around them rewriting itself in ways that made no sense. Noel's legs burned, but every step felt like they were being pulled backward. And then, in the distance, through the trees, a figure appeared. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs stretched out in unnatural angles, and its face was nothing but a blur of dark shadows. "Louis!" Noel's voice cracked as fear surged through him. "What is that?" Louis's face turned white, his eyes wide with terror. That's not possible." And before Noel could move, the figure vanished, swallowed by the dense jungle, leaving only the echo of its footsteps in the distance. Noel's breath came in ragged gasps, "We have to get out of here." But as they turned to leave, the whispering grew louder, closer. They were not alone anymore. The jungle felt suffocating, as though the very air around them had thickened, becoming harder to breathe with each step. Noel's lungs ached, his heart racing in time with his footsteps as he struggled to keep up with Luis. The oppressive silence from moments before had been replaced by a low, almost imperceptible hum, like the jungle itself was breathing, alive and aware of their every move. They had seen something tall, humanoid, but wrong, too elongated, too twisted, too inhuman. Louis had been the first to see it, but Noel wasn't sure if his mind had been playing tricks. The thing had moved so fast, disappearing into the shadows as if it had never been there. But the feeling it left behind lingered, crawling beneath their skin like 1,000 unseen eyes, watching, always waiting. Louis didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face was drawn tight with fear, and his eyes darted nervously to the thick canopy overhead. He was listening, every sense alert to the creeping terror that hung in the air. They pushed through the underbrush, each step more desperate than the last. But the farther they went, the more it felt like they were walking in circles, retracing their steps. The landscape had shifted again, the trees growing more twisted, the shadows longer than they should have been. Noel stopped. "Louis," he breathed. "Louis, we've been here before." Louis froze, his eyes scanning the surroundings with growing panic. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't be." The path ahead was familiar. Too familiar. They had passed this spot earlier, just before the rock with the strange carvings. It was the same area where they had first felt the jungle shift beneath their feet, the same place where they had seen the strange figure. But now it felt different. The air was thicker, more oppressive than before. Noel's stomach churned. "Louis, we're being hunted." Louis didn't respond, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. Noel followed his line of sight and saw it, movement through the trees. Something was there, hiding in the shadows, too still to be a normal creature. It didn't move like an animal. It was deliberate, calculated, and far too silent. "I can't hear it," Noel muttered, but his voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the jungle. Louis turned toward him, eyes wide. "I don't want to hear it." The hum from earlier intensified, vibrating in their bones. It was louder now, unmistakable, and Noel realized it wasn't coming from any living thing. It was the jungle itself, the land, the earth beneath them, alive and responding to their fear. It was like the jungle was calling to them, like it was trying to drag them deeper into its maw. "Run!" Louis shouted, and without another word, they bolted. The dense underbrush tangled around their legs, pulling them down as if the very earth was trying to stop them from escaping. But they pushed forward, desperate, hearts pounding in their chests as the silent presence followed them, relentless, unyielding. Every sound seemed amplified now. Their breathing, the crack of twigs underfoot, the rustling of leaves. It felt like the jungle itself was trying to swallow them whole. Louis pushed ahead, sweat beading on his forehead. "We need to find a way out. We can't keep going like this." But the path ahead was gone again. The trees had shifted, the jungle reconfiguring itself once more, closing in around them. They were trapped in the very place they had feared. A distant, hollow howl pierced the silence, like the cry of something inhuman. It echoed in the still air, reverberating through the trees and crawling down their spines. "What is that?" Noel gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Louis's face had gone pale, his lips trembling. "That's not an animal. That's..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. It wasn't the jungle. It wasn't an animal. Whatever it wasn't natural. Noel stumbled, grabbing a tree to steady himself. We're not going to make it, are we? Louis didn't answer. He was listening again, and in that moment, Noel understood. Whatever was hunting them had learned how to move through the jungle without making a sound. It was closing in. It was there, right behind them. And then, the whispering returned. Noel, Louis. This time it wasn't inside their heads. It was real. It was right there, coming from the darkness around them. And the jungle seemed to close in around them once more. The darkness closed in faster now, every corner of the jungle seeming to fold inward as the eerie whispers grew louder. Noel's breath caught in his throat as he struggled to push through the ever-changing underbrush. It wasn't just the jungle that was closing in. Something else was moving in the dark, just out of reach. He could feel its presence, its cold gaze on him, tracking his every step. Louis was ahead, his body stiff with terror. The man's eyes darted about, wide with panic, but his feet kept moving, desperate to keep going, to outrun whatever was hunting them. They had been running for hours now, but no matter how fast they moved, the jungle seemed to stretch farther, to grow thicker around them. It was as if the jungle itself was trying to keep them in its grasp, to prevent them from escaping. How long have we been running? Noel gasped, barely able to keep up. Louis didn't answer. His breathing was shallow, labored. He didn't need to speak. His fear was enough. It was clear to Noel now that Louis wasn't just afraid of the unknown horrors lurking in the jungle. He was afraid of something specific, something that had been hunting them for far longer than either of them realized. Noel glanced back. For a split second, he thought he saw movement in the shadows, a long, twisted figure moving silently through the trees. The figure was tall, too tall for any natural creature. It was stalking them, drawing closer with each passing second. It's following us, Noel whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. We need to stop. Louis whipped around, eyes wide with fear. No, you don't understand. We can't stop. If we stop, we die. The desperation in Louis's voice made Noel freeze. He had never seen the man so terrified. This wasn't just about surviving the jungle. It was about surviving whatever was out there, in the dark, watching them, waiting. Suddenly Louis stopped, his body rigid, his face drained of color. Noel followed his gaze and felt his blood run cold. In the distance, barely visible through the thick veil of trees, was a shape, a figure, tall and unnatural, standing perfectly still in the shadows. It was watching them. Don't look at it, Louis hissed. Whatever you do, don't look at it for too long. Noel's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the figure. There was something wrong about it, its long limbs, its hollow eyes. It was humanoid, but not quite. The thing seemed to shimmer in the darkness, its form warping with the jungle's shifting canopy. Then, without warning, it moved. The thing didn't walk. It glided across the jungle floor, its limbs stretching unnaturally. With a sudden jerk, it was gone, vanishing into the shadows like it had never been there at all. What was that? Noel gasped, his voice cracking with terror. Louis didn't answer. His eyes were glued to the spot where the thing had been, his body trembling with fear. That's the thing that's been following us. It's the one we heard last night, the one we can't outrun. The realization hit Noel like a cold slap to the face. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was controlling them. And whatever this thing was, it was a part of the jungle, a predator, a creature that stalked those who dared to enter its domain. We're trapped, Noel murmured, backing away slowly. We have to find shelter, somewhere the jungle can't reach us. Louis didn't respond. Instead, he turned and ran. It was almost as if he had already resigned himself to their fate, but he was determined to survive for just a little longer, to escape the thing that hunted them. Noel followed, adrenaline pushing him forward despite the dread that twisted his gut. But even as he ran, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The thing was still out there, its presence lingering like a shadow at the edge of his consciousness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The ground beneath them shifted again. The jungle moved. Louis stumbled, his foot catching on a root. He fell forward, and before Noel could reach him, the ground seemed to swallow him whole. The earth itself opened up, and Louis disappeared, as though the jungle had pulled him into its depths. "No!" Noel screamed, rushing forward. But it was too late. The ground was solid again, the earth closing as though nothing had happened, leaving no trace of the man. Noel stood frozen, his mind spinning. There was no time to mourn. The thing was still out there, and now it was hunting him. The jungle had claimed Louis. It would claim him next. And there was no way out. The jungle had swallowed Louis whole, and now it was closing in on him too. There was nowhere left to run. No way out. The thick air, heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and the dampness of the jungle floor, clung to him like a vice. His skin prickled with sweat, his mind spinning in panic as the shadows around him stretched longer, thicker, more suffocating. The jungle was no longer a forest. It was a prison. He stumbled backward, eyes darting from side to side, searching for any sign of escape. But there was nothing. Only trees. Only shadows. The ground beneath him shifted again, as though the very earth was conspiring to keep him trapped. And in the distance, he could hear it, the hum. That low, eerie vibration that had followed them since the first night. The hum of something alive, something watching. He spun around, desperate to find anything that could help him survive this nightmare. But it was no use. He had been lost for hours, his sense of direction long gone. The jungle's twisted path had lured him deeper, farther into its heart, until he was nothing but a lost soul. "Louis," Noel whispered, his voice hoarse, cracking under the weight of the terror pressing in on him. He wanted to scream, but he knew it would do no good. The jungle would only respond with silence, its breath heavy and slow. The thing hunting them, it was still out there, waiting. Noel's legs trembled, his muscles screaming for rest, but he couldn't stop moving. If he stopped, he would never leave. The thing that had claimed Louis would claim him too. He wiped his brow, his eyes darting around nervously. Something caught his eye, a flicker of movement just beyond the trees. A shadow in the darkness, too tall, too wrong to be a person. It was the figure. Noel froze. It wasn't just a hallucination. This was real. The creature stood motionless, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, its body twisted in a way that defied nature. It was waiting, watching, but not moving. It didn't have to move. The jungle had already done the work for it. The hum grew louder, vibrating in the air like an invisible force. Noel's heart pounded in his chest as the creature began to step forward, its movements deliberate, its eyes gleaming with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. It wasn't a hunter. It was a predator, and it had claimed the jungle as its own. Noel took a step back, then another, but the jungle was moving again. The trees shifted. The earth beneath him changed. The path he had been following was now gone, replaced by a wall of thorns and twisted vines. He was trapped. The creature took another step, and then another, closing the distance between them. Noel could feel its cold, unfeeling gaze on him, its presence suffocating, swallowing him whole. There was no escape. There was no help. Only the jungle. Only the thing that had been waiting for him. With a final, blood-chilling screech, the creature lunged, its limbs stretching impossibly long, and the world went black. Noel never saw the jungle again. In the morning, when the first light of dawn pierced through the dense canopy, the jungle was still. The shifting paths had settled. The trees stood tall and unyielding, as if nothing had ever happened. The only thing left was the echo of the hum, faint, far away, but always present. It would haunt the jungle just as it had haunted Noel, and it would wait for the next lost soul. The air was thick with humidity, the heavy weight of it pressing down on the rescue team as they gathered their gear at the base camp. The dense jungle stretched out in every direction, its towering trees a seemingly endless green sea. Even the sunlight, which struggled to pierce the thick canopy, seemed to hesitate, casting dappled shadows that danced like ghosts on the ground. "Stay close," Captain Claire Martin's voice cut through the air, authoritative but strained. "We're not here for a tour. We're here to find them and get out." She glanced over at the group. Sam, the tech expert, whose face was a mask of concern as he checked his GPS. Jenny, a skilled tracker, wiping the sweat from her brow. And then there was Eric, the medic, whose sharp eyes and calm demeanor had always made him a steady presence during operations like these. The missing migrants had vanished without a trace, swallowed up by the vast, uncharted wilderness that was the Darién Gap. No signs, no clues. It had been weeks since the last trace of them had been reported. No one really knew what had happened, but there were rumors. Whispers about a ghost camp where people just vanished. "We'll stick to the main trail," Claire said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "The sooner we find them, the sooner we get out." They set off into the jungle, their machetes hacking through thick vegetation as they moved deeper. The sounds of the jungle surrounded them, birds calling overhead, the rustle of unseen animals in the undergrowth, the constant hum of insects. But there was something else too, something faint, like a low hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Claire shook it off, chalking it up to the overwhelming atmosphere of the jungle. But something in her gut told her this mission wasn't going to be as simple as they hoped. They traveled for hours, the thick underbrush making their progress slow. Every so often, they would stop to regroup, check their bearings, and listen for any signs of life. But the deeper they ventured, the more unsettling it became. "We should have heard something by now," Jenny murmured, glancing at the dark, oppressive woods around them. "I mean, they had to leave tracks. There's no way they just disappeared." Claire's jaw tightened. "We'll find them. Stay focused." But as the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the jungle floor, the mood in the group grew heavier. The air felt denser, more suffocating. It wasn't just the heat. It was something else, something unexplainable that seemed to cling to the air. The sounds of the jungle seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie silence that was almost unnatural. Then, just as Claire was about to order the team to make camp, Sam held up a hand. "Hold on, there's something ahead." The group fell silent, all eyes on Sam as he tapped at his GPS screen. "It's not far. There's a clearing up ahead." They moved cautiously, making their way through the tangled vines and roots. The silence was oppressive, making every step feel too loud. As they neared the clearing, a chill ran down Claire's spine. She couldn't place it, just a strange feeling that something was terribly wrong. And then they saw it, the camp. It was a sight they weren't expecting to find. A small clearing overgrown with wild plants. But there, in the middle, were abandoned tents and makeshift tables. The campfire was still smoldering, its ashes glowing faintly in the fading light. Scattered backpacks, overturned, and half-eaten meals left on the ground as though the campers had just gotten up and walked away. It was too quiet. Claire's heart skipped a beat. "Stay alert," she commanded. "This doesn't feel right." Jenny stepped forward, kneeling beside one of the abandoned plates. "There's no sign of struggle. No tracks leading away." Sam checked his GPS again. "I'm not picking up any signals. This is This is wrong? Claire's eyes narrowed. The camp had been abandoned too suddenly, too eerily. And then, her gaze fell on something that made her blood run cold. A single, blood-stained shoe was left in the middle of the camp, untouched by the passing of time. "This doesn't make sense," Claire muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. The rescue team stood frozen, the weight of the mystery pressing in on them. Whatever had happened to the missing migrants, it wasn't just the jungle taking them. It was something else, something far darker, and it was waiting, too recently for comfort. "Should we investigate further?" Jenny asked, her voice barely audible as she glanced around the clearing, her eyes darting nervously toward the jungle's edge. Claire didn't answer immediately. She stood up slowly, her gaze shifting from the shoe to the camp. The half-eaten meals, the smoldering fire, and the untouched belongings, they didn't add up. What could cause people to leave so abruptly, without taking their most essential belongings? "Stay focused," Claire said, her voice tight with tension. "This could be a clue. We need to check the area. Sam, what's your GPS telling you now?" Sam looked at his device, frowning. "I'm getting a signal, but it's faint. It doesn't make sense. The signal's coming from the jungle." He gestured vaguely toward the dense trees. "It's not pointing to anything in the camp itself. It's like it's trying to lure us." Claire felt a wave of unease flood over her. "The signal's not coming from any of the camp's equipment? Nothing here is giving off a transmission?" "Not exactly," Sam replied. "It's like the device is reacting to something deeper in the forest." Claire exchanged a glance with Eric, the medic. He wasn't the type to get rattled easily, but the dark look on his face told her that something was wrong. "This feels off," Eric murmured. "It's too perfect, like someone was here just moments ago, but where did they go?" Jenny stepped back from the campfire, her gaze fixed on the dense trees surrounding them. "It's like they disappeared into thin air." "We keep searching," Claire ordered. "We're not leaving yet. The migrants may have gone this way. We follow the signal. We stay together." But as they moved to collect their gear, a strange rustling noise echoed from the edge of the jungle. It was faint at first, like the shifting of leaves in a breeze. But there was no wind. The air had gone deathly still. "Did anyone hear that?" Jenny whispered, her eyes wide with apprehension. Claire held up her hand, signaling for silence. The rustling grew louder, more distinct, but still no breeze stirred the leaves. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, footsteps that were too heavy to belong to any animal. They weren't the light, shifting steps of a jungle creature. These were deliberate, methodical, and they were moving closer. "Everyone, stay close," Claire said quietly, her voice low but commanding. She motioned for Jenny to take the lead, with Sam and Eric bringing up the rear. She kept her eyes on the edge of the jungle, her every sense on high alert. The group moved deeper into the trees, their machetes slicing through thick vines and undergrowth. As they made their way forward, the sounds of the jungle seemed to fade away, replaced by an unsettling silence. The temperature dropped a few degrees, and Claire noticed that even the birds had stopped calling. It was as if the jungle itself had gone still. Sam was the first to speak. "This is wrong. It's too quiet." "Keep moving," Claire urged, her voice tight. She wasn't sure whether she was trying to convince him or herself. Then, from behind them, there was a sudden snap of a twig, followed by a soft rustling. Claire turned sharply, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who's there?" she called, her voice cutting through the silence. No response. Her pulse quickened as she glanced back at the team. Eric's face had gone pale, his hand resting nervously on the handle of his knife. Jenny was scanning the trees with wide eyes, her body tense, every muscle locked in fear. Then Sam's voice came from ahead, trembling. I think I found something. Claire hurried forward, her boots crunching on the dry leaves beneath her feet. As she reached him, she saw what had caught his attention. A series of strange marks were carved into the bark of a nearby tree, deep, jagged lines that looked almost deliberate. "These don't look like animal scratches," Sam muttered. "These are human." Claire's stomach twisted. She reached out to touch the markings, and as her fingers brushed the rough surface, she felt a sudden shiver run up her spine. "They're fresh," she said, her voice barely audible. "They were made recently." Before anyone could respond, a soft, almost inaudible whisper filled the air. Too faint to be real, but unmistakable nonetheless. "No one else heard that?" Eric asked, his voice shaking. "I heard it," Jenny said, her eyes wide. "It's coming from the trees." Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't need to look around to know they were being watched. "We need to keep moving," she said, a sense of urgency creeping into her voice. "Stick to the trail. We need to find them before whatever is out here finds us." The jungle seemed to close in around them as they continued deeper into the forest, the whispering voices growing louder, echoing through the trees. The sense of being hunted was unmistakable now, and Claire knew whatever had taken the migrants, whatever was lurking in the jungle, it was waiting for them too. The deeper they trekked into the jungle, the more the air seemed to close in around them, thick and suffocating. The whispering had faded into an eerie silence, but the weight of the atmosphere had only grown heavier. The trees loomed overhead like ancient guardians, their gnarled branches entwined, blocking out much of the light. It felt as though the jungle itself was conspiring to keep them in the dark, both physically and mentally. Claire kept her eyes trained ahead, her machete cutting through the dense undergrowth. Jenny walked beside her, every now and then glancing back over her shoulder, the unease in her eyes unmistakable. Sam and Eric, at the rear of the group, had grown quiet, their footsteps careful but slow. "Do you think they're still alive?" Jenny asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The migrants, I mean." Claire didn't answer immediately. She didn't want to give Jenny false hope, but she also didn't want to say what she was really thinking. The further they traveled, the more it seemed unlikely that they'd find anyone alive. And yet, they had to keep moving. They had to find some answers. "I don't know," Claire finally said, "but we have to keep looking. We can't leave without knowing what happened to them." Jenny nodded, though it was clear she wasn't reassured. The sound of their machetes hacking through the undergrowth seemed too loud in the stillness, a reminder that they weren't alone. After an hour of walking in silence, Claire held up her hand, signaling for the group to stop. She'd noticed something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. A faint, acrid scent had begun to hang in the air, something metallic and sour, like blood. It was unmistakable. "Do you smell that?" Claire asked quietly. Sam stopped a few paces behind her, sniffing the air. His face twisted in disgust. "Yeah, what is that? It smells like death." Eric frowned. "Could be the remains of an animal. Maybe a predator was here." But Claire wasn't so sure. The smell was different. It was thick, overpowering, and it lingered unnaturally in the air, like it had been there for far too long. "Stay sharp," Claire ordered. "It's not safe. Keep your eyes open." They continued on, but the scent only grew stronger, filling their nostrils and making their stomachs churn. The jungle felt even darker now, the path narrowing as they moved deeper into the unknown. Then, through the dense trees, Claire saw it, something that shouldn't have been there. A faint, flickering light in the distance, like a campfire. At first, she thought it was just her eyes playing tricks on her, but as they approached, the light grew brighter, flickering more steadily. It was a fire, but it wasn't like any fire she had ever seen before. The flames were a sickly yellow, not the warm orange of a typical campfire. It was as though the fire itself was wrong, unnatural. "We're not the first ones here," Sam muttered under his breath. "This is too strange." Claire motioned for the group to move quietly. They crept closer to the fire, careful not to make a sound. As they approached, they could see it more clearly. The fire was surrounded by a circle of large stones, but it wasn't just a normal campfire. There were strange symbols carved into the rocks, symbols that Claire couldn't recognize, but that filled her with an unsettling sense of dread. Eric stepped forward, squinting at the symbols. These are tribal markings, but I've never seen anything like this." "Keep your distance," Claire warned. "We don't know who or what might have made this fire." As they circled the clearing, they saw that there were no signs of human activity. No tent, no backpacks, no gear. Just the fire, burning in the middle of nowhere. The silence hung heavy as the group exchanged uneasy glances. Then, a noise broke the tension. A low, guttural sound. A growl, but not from any animal Claire had ever heard. It was coming from the trees. They froze. "Did you hear that?" Jenny whispered, her voice shaking. Claire nodded, her heart racing. It wasn't an animal. It was too low, too deliberate. Something, or someone, was watching them. The growl grew louder, closer. Then, something stepped out from the shadows of the trees. It was human. Or at least it looked like a person, at first. But the figure was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs twisted in unnatural ways. Its skin was pale, almost grey, and stretched tight over its bones. Its face was a grotesque mask of features, its eyes too wide, too hollow, as if there was no soul behind them. It was wearing clothes, but the fabric was torn and ragged, as if it had been here for ages. The figure's mouth opened wide, revealing teeth too sharp to be real, and it let out a blood-curdling scream. The sound echoed through the jungle, bouncing off the trees like a mocking laughter. Claire didn't wait. "Run!" she shouted, grabbing Jenny by the arm and pulling her away from the fire. Sam and Eric were already sprinting in the opposite direction, the sound of their footsteps pounding behind them, but as they ran, Claire felt it. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, as if the jungle itself was pulling them deeper, trapping them within its grasp. The growl followed them, fading in and out of the thick jungle. Claire's heart was in her throat as she pushed herself harder, faster. But no matter how fast she ran, the jungle seemed to stretch on forever, the trees closing in like a maze. Suddenly she stumbled, her foot catching on a root, and she fell forward, landing hard on the ground. Her head spun as she tried to push herself up. She could hear the others ahead of her, their shouts and footsteps growing distant. "Claire!" Jenny's voice was faint. "Where are you?" Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She pushed herself up, only to freeze as she saw something ahead of her, a dark shape moving in the shadows. It was watching her. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she struggled to stand, her body aching from the fall. She could hear Jenny's voice calling her name, but it was fading. The jungle was swallowing them whole. She stumbled forward, her legs trembling as she pushed through the thick undergrowth, trying to reach her companions. The growl from earlier still lingered in the air, haunting her thoughts, but it was replaced now by something worse, a cold, oppressive feeling, like something unseen was moving just beyond the edge of her vision. Her hand brushed against a tree as she rounded a bend, and her fingers froze against the bark. There, etched into the trunk, were more symbols, similar to the ones around the fire. They were darker now, etched deeper into the wood, as if the tree itself had absorbed the marks over time. The symbols seemed to pulse with an eerie, unnatural energy. "Claire, we need to go," Jenny's voice called again, louder now, more frantic. Claire's heart leapt. She pushed herself forward, stumbling through the dense foliage, her eyes scanning desperately for any sign of her group. The jungle was suffocating. The air was thick and heavy, the dampness clinging to her skin, but it wasn't the humidity that made her shiver. It was the unmistakable sense of being watched. The sound of movement rustled in the trees above her, and Claire froze, her body tensing. It wasn't just the growls now. There was a whispering sound, soft and indistinct, as if voices were being carried on the wind just beyond comprehension. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement in the shadows, a figure, not quite human, not quite animal. It darted from tree to tree, its movements quick and erratic, as if it were toying with her, playing a game. The figure paused for a moment, just long enough for Claire to catch a glimpse. A face, pale and hollow, its eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. She gasped, instinctively taking a step back. But the figure was gone before she could make a sound. It moved like a shadow, leaving only a lingering sense of dread in its wake. Claire wasn't sure how much more she could take. The jungle felt alive, breathing, pulsing with malevolent energy. She pushed forward, determined to find her team. She couldn't let the jungle swallow them whole. Suddenly a scream pierced the air. It was Jenny. Claire's heart raced as she sprinted toward the sound, her legs burning with effort. She was close now. She could see the faint glow of their campfire through the trees, the last beacon of hope in this nightmare. But as she drew closer, the world around her shifted again. The campfire flickered and dimmed, as though it were fighting to stay alive. And when Claire pushed through the last of the underbrush, she found something far worse than she could have imagined. The camp was gone. No fire, no tents, no backpacks, nothing. Just the empty, silent jungle. Claire's mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened, but the weight of the jungle's presence crushed her thoughts. Something in the air felt wrong. It was like the earth beneath her feet had disappeared. The very ground she stood on felt hollow. Her heart pounded in her chest as she spun around, her mind fighting to make sense of the scene. "Jenny?" she called, her voice shaky. But the only response was silence. Then, just as Claire's panic reached its peak, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper curled through the air. It came from behind her. "Help. Us." Claire whipped around, but the jungle was still. A shadow darted out from the trees, too fast for her to follow. Something was there. Something close. Something watching. She ran. The jungle was closing in again, and there was nowhere to hide. Then she heard it again. The whisper. It wasn't coming from the trees or the wind. It was coming from within. Claire stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with terror. The sound seemed to crawl inside her skull, like the very air was speaking to her. "Help us." She shuddered, looking wildly around. Her mind was beginning to fracture, the edges of reality becoming blurred. The jungle felt different now. It wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it was playing with her. Claire turned, but all she could see was the dense wall of foliage. The jungle was closing in around her, its walls tightening, its shadows growing longer. A low growl rose from the depths of the trees, sending another wave of fear through her body. She wasn't alone. She never had been. A crack sounded from behind her, and Claire spun around. Her breath hitched as she caught a fleeting glimpse of something. A shadow. Too fast. Too dark. Too close. She couldn't make out what it was, but she felt its eyes on her, cold and unblinking. Without thinking, she bolted. Every step seemed to take her deeper into the heart of the jungle. The air was thick with moisture, and the smell of decay. The world around her nothing but a blur of green and brown. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't let whatever it was that followed her catch up. The whispers grew louder. "Help. Us." She could almost make out words now, almost understand what they were saying, but it didn't matter. She didn't want to know. Her feet were slipping, her body growing weaker, but she kept running. Her survival instincts kicked in, but the jungle was unforgiving. Roots twisted beneath her feet, branches lashed at her face, and the trees seemed to reach out, pulling her in. Finally, she stumbled to a stop, chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She was lost, truly lost. Her entire body shook with exhaustion, but she couldn't give up. Not yet. She glanced over her shoulder once more. The figure was closer now, emerging from the shadows. It was too dark to make out any details, but she could see its shape, tall and elongated, its movements jerky and unnatural. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything she had ever seen before. And then, to her horror, it spoke again. "Help. Us." Claire's stomach twisted, and her blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from something far older, something that had existed in the jungle for centuries. It was part of the jungle itself. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the ground, unable to move. The figure was standing just a few feet away now, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It was waiting for her to make the next move. And then she realized the worst part. She wasn't running to escape it. She was running toward it. Chapter 5. The Silent Pursuer. Claire's breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled through the thick undergrowth, branches scraping her skin, her eyes darting in all directions. Her mind raced, but her body could barely keep up. She was losing control, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. She couldn't remember when she'd lost track of the others. They were supposed to be right behind her, but now it was just her, alone in this dark, suffocating jungle. Then she heard it again, the whisper. It wasn't coming from the trees or the wind. It was coming from within. Claire stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with terror. The sound seemed to crawl inside her skull, like the very air was speaking to her. "Help us!" She shuddered, looking wildly around. Her mind was beginning to fracture, the edges of reality becoming blurred. The jungle felt different now. It wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it was playing with her. Claire turned, but all she could see was the dense wall of foliage. The jungle was closing in around her, its walls tightening, its shadows growing longer. A low growl rose from the depths of the trees, sending another wave of fear through her body. She wasn't alone. She never had been. A crack sounded from behind her and Claire spun around. Her breath hitched as she caught a fleeting glimpse of something. A shadow. Too fast. Too dark. Too close. She couldn't make out what it was, but she felt its eyes on her, cold and unblinking. Without thinking, she bolted. Every step seemed to take her deeper into the heart of the jungle. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of decay. The world around her nothing but a blur of green and brown. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't let whatever it was that followed her catch up. The whispers grew louder. "Help! Us!" She could almost make out words now, almost understand what they were saying, but it didn't matter. She didn't want to know. Her feet were slipping, her body growing weaker, but she kept running. Her survival instincts kicked in, but the jungle was unforgiving. Roots twisted beneath her feet, branches lashed at her face, and the trees seemed to reach out, pulling her in. Finally, she stumbled to a stop, chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She was lost, truly lost. Her entire body shook with exhaustion, but she couldn't give up. Not yet. She glanced over her shoulder once more. The figure was closer now, emerging from the shadows. It was too dark to make out any details, but she could see its shape, tall and elongated, its movements jerky and unnatural. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything she had ever seen before. And then, to her horror, it spoke again. "Help. Us." Claire's stomach twisted, and her blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from something far older, something that had existed in the jungle for centuries. It was part of the jungle itself. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the ground, unable to move. The figure was standing just a few feet away now, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It was waiting for her to make the next move. And then she realized the worst part. She wasn't running to escape it, she was running toward it.